Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Should you work with your spouse or another close family member? You know, in the U.S., or actually in most of the world for that matter, dental offices tend to fall under the heading of a small business, okay? And in the U.S., in a lot of cases, small businesses are family businesses, whether it's a succession of generations working in the business or a number of family members working at the business at the same time. So it's a family business. So this is not an uncommon occurrence, whether it's in a dental office or another business where someone is working with another member of their family. But is it a good idea? If you Google it, you'll get mixed results. Some people will sing the praises of it. Others will tell you how bad of an idea it is. And then you get your neutral articles, which just share the pros and cons. Well, here at MGE, a lot of clients work with their spouse, whether their spouse is the office manager or their spouse is another dentist and they run the practice together. It is not an uncommon occurrence. But we do teach our clients several guidelines to follow to ensure that that working together doesn't wreck their home life or their work life or both. And that's what I want to cover in this week's episode, specifically 4 things or 4 ways you can make it work when you're working with your spouse or other family member. I know I use the word work there a lot, but it works. Anyway, so my name is Jeff Blumberg and I'm your host. And to give you an idea, what inspired this episode was at MGE, down our hallway leading to the seminar room and in our big breakout area where clients can get snacks and coffee and whatnot, we have these posters hanging on the wall. And these are clients who have finished the MGE Power Program. There's quite a few of these posters. And, I've known clients have worked with their spouses for a long time, and in a lot of cases, we've had spouses come out of other industries to come work in the office, Wall Street, banking, et cetera. But I finally did a little bit of a count last week. I'm walking down the hall, and these aren't all the Power Program graduates in the history of the Power Program, but it's quite a few notable ones. And I'm looking, and over 60% of the clients in these posters work with their spouse. So this is something that can really work. So I thought it was a timely subject for an episode. So let's just jump right into this. That's what's inspired it. That's why I thought it would be a good idea. And maybe you're in a position where you are working with your spouse and you can apply what we're talking about here to make smooth that out to make sure it doesn't interfere with your home life. Or maybe you've considered asking your spouse to come in and manage the practice or something along those lines, and you've avoided it because you thought it was a bad idea. Well, here's how you can make it work. All right, so let's take a look at these 4 things. What are the 4 things or 4 concepts that you want to apply in order to make this work? Or what I'll do is I'll get into how it goes wrong and then how to make it go right. All right, so let's look at the first thing. Part of the reason or one of the big problems when you bring your spouse into the business, and as an aside, I work with my spouse. She's been on this podcast before. You've heard Sabri. She is my spouse. So I've lived what I'm telling you too and what we teach clients. So is one thing that'll make it not work, especially because you're bringing your spouse in and your spouse now has skin in the game. It is of utmost importance. Let's say your spouse was in banking and they come to run your practices. Well, obviously it's important to them. They've just given up their career that your practice is very successful. They have a lot of intention to have a successful practice and they have a lot of skin in the game. Okay. But if you don't clearly outline whose job is what, you'll find in being zealous in the sense of wanting to see you successful, you guys will end up doing a little bit of the same job. Okay. So you have the spouse trying to wear the owner hat and the doctor owner trying to wear the owner hat, and then you start to get clashes. All right. And this is just something to think with in general in life. If you take a look in life, you have several roles that you play, and each of those roles have different duties and purposes and outcomes. I don't mean to make it so sterile, but if you take a look, for example, let's say I'll take me, for example. So I have several different roles. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm an executive. I'm a son. And each of these roles have different outcomes, have different job duties associated with them, and you act differently in these roles. So it would be a bit weird if I come home from work and I'm acting like I'm the boss at work with my wife at home. That's a quick way to get, what's the word? Brained, right? Hit with something hard. That isn't going to work because what I'm doing at that point, it's the wrong thing. It doesn't fit the situation that I'm in. So you have these different jobs that we all have in our life, and they have different outcomes associated with them. So if you're going into a working environment with your spouse, you want to clearly outline at the beginning who is responsible for what so that you're not stepping on each other's toes. You also want to make sure that you have a clear-cut, I don't know what word I would use, maybe series or type of etiquette or protocols that you follow when you're dealing with other staff, and how you handle yourselves with relation to the staff. Because, you don't want to have a situation where you're fighting because you had problems at home while you're at the office. Because when you're at work, your coworkers or your boss and junior, you're not spouses. You're not husband, wife, or whatever. You're not significant others. When you're at work, you are those specific jobs. So you can't bring that stuff in with you, because if you start to do that, if you're arguing this, that, or the other, it can create a bit of a situation where the staff don't quite know what's going on or how to handle this or whatever, and it becomes a bit of a problem. So you want to make sure that you separate these jobs out very clearly. And the way to do that is not just to say, hey, why don't you come into my office and run my practice? It's, okay, this is my job. This is your job. This is how this would work. So everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to do, as well as, when we're dealing with the staff, I've seen it where the office manager will call the doctor in front of the staff, Dr. So-and-so, even though it's their, wife or husband. They don't say, oh yeah, it's Susie or Bill, it's Dr. So-and-so, because that's what's expected from an etiquette perspective in the practice. So you want to have the stuff outlined ahead of time, so that you don't have a situation where you're trying to be a husband or wife at work when really you're the office manager or the owner doctor. Okay? Next point has to do with office policy. Again, because you're bringing in a spouse or a family member, they have this extreme sense of loyalty as well as a desire to see the business successful. So you might have areas that don't have any clear-cut rules or policy, so they'll want to create some. That has to be done in coordination. All right. So, because obviously the owner doctor should be the one that's at least approving policy in the practice. So you want to make sure you have clear-cut policy in different areas, operational rules and things of this nature, so that you guys don't have something to argue about when it comes to how the practice is run. Now, in some cases, especially with the changes that have occurred the last 3 years, a lot more digitization has occurred over the last 3 years, you might find certain procedures. I just found that here at the company. There was a lot of things that were done on paper that are no longer done on paper here at MGE from years ago. But unless you actually change that with some form of policy, people tend to just sort of do the same thing, and it almost is a little dumb. Well, someone could come in and go, well, that's dumb, let's stop doing it. But you can't do that. If you're going to change policy, it has to be an agreed upon thing, and you make the change. So obviously, if you bring in a family member, there has to be clear-cut guidelines, policy, et cetera. And, in the event they find something that should be changed, there should be an agreed upon easy way of doing that. So that's point number 2. Point number 3, and this is actually, to me, the biggest and most important point and the toughest one to enforce. You have to leave work at work. You have to leave work at work. You can go, Jeff, yeah, of course we do that, but maybe you don't, okay? I know, because I've worked with my spouse for, since 1995. I've worked side by side with my spouse. So we're going on almost 30 years we've worked side by side. And there's nothing worse than being at home. I remember I had a client telling me about this once. Their wife was the office manager. They're laying in bed at 11 o'clock. The lights are out. They're about to fall asleep. And the wife just starts going off about their financial coordinator. Wearing this office manager hat or role, telling him how bad the financial coordinator is and what are we going to do about the insurance. The husband, who's the doc, is laying in bed trying to fall asleep. It just does not work, right? So one thing that we implemented early on when we started working together is when we leave the office, it's almost like we're taking off, a jacket. That's, my job. I took my jacket off, I hang it up, and I leave. I am no longer my job at the office. I'm no longer the executive in charge, right? I am now your husband, or, I'm dad, or whoever I am. And when we leave and we get in the car, we don't talk about work at all. And it's a bit funny because, what do a lot of couples do at the end of the day over dinner? How was your day? What did you do at work? Now, I happen to know what my wife did at work, and she knows what I did because she's here. So there's really no reason to talk about that. Otherwise, you feel like you are always at work. One thing you could do, we did this at first, was, on our drive home, we pass a big road about 2 blocks from the office. We said, okay, if you want to mention some work stuff, and it could be things that, went well today or something like this, once we cross that road, we're no longer talking about work. That road right there, once we cross it, work is over, okay? And we started doing that, and I noticed that home life became a lot calmer because we were no longer, you have, again, there's a certain attitude and a certain way you operate or act when you're in a work environment versus when you're at home. It's a total different operating basis. And I don't want to have the operating basis of, the senior executive here at MGE when I step into my house, because it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. If you look at, for example, I'll talk about these roles a little bit more. When let's say you're a guy and you hang out with your friends who are guys, there's a certain way you act and an attitude you have and things that you all find mutually interesting. Well, if you were to act that way around, let's say, your grandma, that wouldn't go over very well, because that's not like how a grandson acts. It's not how a grandson talks. So you have different roles that you fulfill in your life. So what you want to do is, when you are, in the car driving home with your spouse, you're now the husband or the wife. And that's what you guys are focusing on. You're not worried about what happened at the office, because you know what? You're going to be at the office tomorrow, and you're going to be there for 8 or 9 hours tomorrow. And you can worry about it then. That's why you go to work. That's the whole point. And that, to me, with the whole working at home evolution, I think was actually one of the bigger problems. Sure, it's great. I don't have to commute. I don't have to. Obviously, you can't do this in dentistry, but you've seen a lot of industries do this. But, I can work from home, and it's much easier. I can take care of my dog, whatever. But the problem with that is then you're never leaving work. You're always at work. So even when we were on shutdown back during COVID, we applied those same rules. When we were working, we had workspaces, and that's what we were doing. And when we were done, we shut those workspaces and we were done. Now, is this something you can do all the time? No, you might have an emergency or some type of a thing that requires you to bring up or cover a work subject while you are living your home life. But it is something that I would advise that you enforce as much as possible. And it takes discipline from the both of you. When I started doing this initially, my wife and I, it would be one of us would start talking about something work-related, went, oh, remember, we're on our way home now. Oh, yeah, you're right. And we kept doing that until it just became a matter of course. We just don't do that. We don't discuss work at home unless there's an emergency or a disaster of some kind, which how often does that happen? It's not very frequent. Like during the COVID initial shutdowns, we were, working all the time. But for the most part, you want to, when you're home, you're home. When you're at work, you work. And you actually have to not just have that as a mentality. It is something you actually have to practice and follow through with and do. When you leave the office is over. You're now being, the husband or the wife, etc. Okay? All right. Which brings us to our fourth point, which, makes it not work when you're working with a family member, and what to do to avoid it, which is, when you hire a family member, maybe it's not your spouse, maybe it's your sister-in-law, brother-in-law, whatever, and they can't actually do the job that you've hired them for. You have to, one of the things, if you're entertaining the idea of bringing in a family member, obviously you're doing it, you don't just do it because of the fact that they are related to you. You want to do it because they actually could fulfill the role. It's like any other hiring process you go through when you hire an office manager or someone else. The person has to be able to actually execute the job. You have to at least think that that's possible before you do it. You're not just hiring them because they're related to you. The fact that they bring with them a heavy interest in your success or whatever is a bonus, but they have to be able to do the job. So one of the things I would do, and I've done when I'm bringing a family member into a business, is I want to make sure that they understand, look, we're going to be working together. And I tend to judge family members actually a little bit more, at least the same as everybody else, if not with a little bit of a higher standard, which is the opposite of what you normally see. And one of the reasons that working with family gets a bit of a knock on it is, somebody hires their, brother or brother-in-law or whomever, and they're just not very good at their job. And the person gets unlimited chances because they're related or they're allowed to do things that other employees aren't allowed to do. That's why working with family gets a bad name. Well, one of the reasons working with family gets a bad name. So I would be very clear before I jumped into this relationship that, look, obviously I want to do this. I want this to work out, but, you have to actually be able to do the job. And if there's any problems with this, I want to make sure that I can discuss this with you so that if it's not working out and we can move on without destroying our personal relationship. Like, this is strictly a business thing when we're working together, right? And the person should understand that and agree to that before you actually bring them in. If you're looking at hiring a sister-in-law, brother-in-law, etc., so that if you're judging them the way you would judge any other employee, if after a couple weeks you go, wow, this is just really not going to work, that you can move on without it becoming a huge problem. I mean, you can handle it in a way where it's not embarrassing for everybody. But, if Joe decided this wasn't for him, or something like this, but they should know that that's the score. Just because they're related to you, that doesn't mean they have unlimited chances and aren't going to be handled like any other employee. Now, on the flip side of that, I've seen it where the person doing the hiring, the owner, etc., brings in a family member and the family member isn't functioning on the job and they just let it perpetuate. They won't do anything about it because, they're a family member. Well, I'm not a fan of that because if I have somebody if I had someone who was not a family member and I had them on this job and they were doing a poor job, well, I'm obviously going to fire them if they can't reform or do better. Well, that gives them an opportunity to go do something else that they might find fulfilling. It also, in a lot of cases, if someone is just not doing a good job and not functioning, and they could, okay? I'm talking about somebody who could be, but they're just not, right? They're more interested in partying or this or that or whatever. And if I let them go because they're not working well, then in some cases that's a wake-up call for people. And they go, wow, I gotta get my stuff together. And then they actually go on in life and they make it. And they actually raise their self-esteem because they were actually able to be successful. Okay. So if I have somebody working for me who's a family member and I'm not enforcing like I would with any other employee, and I let them continue to turn in subpar work or a subpar job, you may think you're doing something cool because, you're helping out your brother-in-law or whatever. Well, you're actually not. You're actually doing them a disservice, not just you a disservice and your staff a disservice. Obviously, for you have lowered productivity, less performance. It actually starts to make the other staff bitter, and disaffected in a sense. They start to they don't buy what's going on because, Joe, the brother-in-law, can get away with everything because he's a family member. They don't like that. So it's not good for your team, but it's also not good for Joe, the brother-in-law, because Joe needs to make it in life and Joe needs to have realize that Joe made it on his own steam, on his own 2 feet. And Joe knows that he's not performing. So if I leave Joe there and let him continue to do that, I am doing a disservice to Joe. I am going to handle Joe like any other employee. And I would have discussed this with him beforehand so that he knows, look, if this isn't working, we're going to move on to put ourselves in a position where we can actually make it work. Okay. So those are the 4 main issues that I've seen. And like I said, working with family, I enjoy it. Like I said, I work with my spouse. I actually work with my sister and my brother-in-law and it's great. And lots of our clients do. And it can be an extremely workable situation. It's, you're working with people who have the same interests and the same degree of intention for success and loyalty, as you have. So it's actually very fun. But you want to keep some of these points in mind to make sure that the fact that you work together doesn't start to bleed into your home life and start to create problems. Anyway, it's a little bit of an oddball episode. It doesn't really fit any particular subject, but it's something I've wanted to do for a while. I hope it helps. I thought it was timely only because a lot of our clients, as well as just a lot of our newer clients or dentists in general, tend to work with a spouse or another family member. And by following these things, I hope it helps you make it work. That's all I have for you this week. If you have any questions or want to learn more about MGE, you can find us online at ngeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Otherwise, have a great week, and I'll see you at the next episode.